Welcome to the second video in Lysna's series on our behavioural analysis research. In this video, we will explore how we assess the level of psychological safety and quality of relationships within a team meeting through looking at what we call reinforcing behaviour. Belonging to a team depends on us feeling that there is common ground, a sense of shared purpose, and each has our place and is valued and respected. This impacts our level of engagement and consequently on our performance and well-being. Feeling valued and respected is linked to reward, but it also depends on how people treat us. Gottman's research into relationships identified showing contempt for a partner as the best predictor of divorce, where contempt is defined as sending the message that you are better than the other person. And contempt is the opposite of showing respect. Feeling valued and respected helps us to feel psychologically safe. Amy Edmondson defines psychological safety as the shared belief within the team that it is safe to take interpersonal risks, and it has been shown to be one of the core components of a successful team. Teams that don't take risks may struggle to develop new ideas and will stay within their comfort zone. Duhigg's assessment of the Google Aristotle research into psychological safety suggests you need to give each person in the room time to speak. This will show up in the managing of airtime that we shared in video 1 and the amount of airtime that is given and accepted. In our research, we have identified reinforcing behaviours as being key to developing the sense of belonging, respect and safety within the team. One point to make here is that our research is European, but what constitutes appropriate behaviour varies culturally across the globe. Acceptable reinforcement behaviour differs in Asia, for example, where stating negativity is taboo. However, the underlying psychology that we describe here may still hold true. Reinforcing behaviour is always directed at another individual in the meeting. Positive reinforcement behaviours provide people with support. This includes agreeing with their ideas, offering them praise or positive feedback, thanking them for their contributions, and demonstrating empathy and understanding on where they are coming from. Negative reinforcement includes disagreeing with their ideas, giving negative feedback, and a behaviour we call defend-attack. The difference with defend-attack is that it is personal. It also includes humour, where that humour is at the expense of somebody else. For example, here is a joke that some people may find funny and others not, and the person it is aimed at may not find it funny at all, which is why we call it defend-attack. But if the joke is self-deprecating, i.e. aimed at oneself, then we class it as a lubricating behaviour that helps to ease the flow of the conversation and lacks the same potential to offend. Our data shows that most reinforcement behaviour is positive in the form of support, praise and gratitude. We hear a small amount of empathy or demonstrating understanding. On the negative side, most of what we hear is disagreement, objections or negative feedback, with a smaller amount of defend-attack. High levels of defend-attack indicate more humour or banter. So let's look at the impact of these behaviours. Positive reinforcement behaviour helps to create a sense of common ground where everyone is in agreement, feels connected with each other and has a sense of belonging to the group. But we can have too much of a good thing. You don't want to be positive Pat, who just says yes all the time. How much do you really trust someone who always says yes? Are they just seeking to please, or are they staying true to their own values and beliefs? And does this mean they say yes to everyone? Positive Pat may want an easier life in the short term, but this doesn't make for long-term success. We have to balance positive reinforcement against the need to stand back and look objectively at a situation and consider other points of view. Otherwise, we may become subject to groupthink and collusion, which tends to block out other perspectives and mitigates against questioning and challenge. It also makes it less safe for potential detractors to speak up. Overpraise can also lead to inflated egos and misplaced complacency. When we studied effective coaches, they gave less praise than their less effective peers, as well as avoiding negative feedback completely. Instead, they encourage their coachees to reflect on their own performance and identify their own strengths and weaknesses. Let's now look at negative reinforcement. What goes wrong here is that it is often too quick. If one person puts forward an idea or proposal and someone else responds immediately with a counter proposal or disagrees with it, then the message the original proposer receives is that their point of view hasn't been really listened to or respected, and they can feel criticised. This tends to produce an emotional response and often a counter reaction. Gottman also identified criticism as another predictor of divorce. So the scene is set potentially for conflict, with the level of psychological safety falling. Here is an example of how the level of psychological safety can vary in a meeting and be affected by negative reinforcement. It is not hard to spot where an emotive comment sent the meeting into a reinforcement spiral and the level of psychological safety crashed. People can also be really bad at giving feedback. How would you feel if you were on the receiving end of these examples? And which would you find most useful? The first one is a defend attack because it is personal. The second focuses on the task, but the receiver doesn't know what they could change. The third is actionable feedback that you could do something about. The fourth is also actionable, but is making a proposal on what to do and comes across as giving advice, which good coaches try to avoid. And they know that if they do give feedback, you can give as much positive as you like, but it is the negative that will be remembered. So if you do want to give negative feedback, limit it to one thing, because we can only ever really work at improving one aspect of our behaviour at a time. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't challenge, but it's the way that we do it that is important. If you hear an idea and don't agree with everything, then responding with a negative means the other person will hear the no and nothing else. To avoid being seen as a negative Nick, always look for what you can agree with when you are listening to ideas and contributions from others. Starting with a positive response helps to create that sense of connection, which then makes it easier to question and challenge the other person. Another way of avoiding starting with a disagreement is to start by expressing your feelings about what has been said, which calls attention to the fact that you are disagreeing and prepares the other person to hear a disagreement, but at the same time demonstrates that you have taken in what they have suggested and emotionally reacted to it. In addition, if you listen closely to the proposal, you might find something that you don't really understand, so you can ask clarifying questions. Or you might want to repeat the proposal back to the other person so that you can clarify it in your own mind. Both these behaviours show that you are listening to the other person and helps them to feel heard and respected. So we've given you some alternative behaviours to negative reinforcement. But let's imagine if all you did was ask questions or make comments and never offered any reinforcement at all. What would it feel like to be at the receiving end of such behaviour? This profile belongs to Poker Face Sam, and people find this person more difficult to work with than Negative Nick. This is because you just don't know what Poker Face Sam is thinking, so you don't know if they are accepting of you or not. This uncertainty tends to create real anxiety, especially because as humans we are primed to expect the negative, and so the level of psychological safety falls. What happens when people don't feel safe is that we see defensive behaviour, a third predictor of divorce according to Gottman. People may not outwardly challenge others, but they may try to justify their position by giving more information. They may also say things like, "It's just my opinion," or "It's only what I think," which we call discounting. Having looked at how people give reinforcement, let's now look at what is received. Our research has uncovered the existence of heroes and outcasts. Heroes are those people who receive far more positive reinforcement than anyone else, and far more positive than negative. Outcasts are those who receive more negative than positive, or their ratio of positive to negative is much smaller than others in the group. We don't regard either of these as being particularly effective. Being a hero is good for the ego, but you run the risk of becoming overconfident, ignoring other perspectives, and ultimately making mistakes. Outcasts struggle to feel part of the group and to be heard. We can identify heroes and outcasts by looking at their ratios of positive to negative. In Gottman's research, they found that happy couples who stayed together had a ratio of positive to negative emotions during conflict of 5:1. So, when we are looking for heroes, we look for ratios that are at least that high. In this example, we can see that the person we identified as a hero has a positive to negative ratio twice that of Gottman's, so this confirms them as a hero. Gottman also found that couples who ultimately divorced tended to have a positive to negative ratio of 0.8. The first person we suggested was an outcast certainly has a ratio that meets this criteria. But we also find people reporting feeling outcast when they have a ratio between 1 and 2, especially when that ratio is much less than others in the meeting. So we consider a ratio of less than 1 as definitely an outcast, and a ratio of being between 1 and 2 as being potentially so. Here we have an example of individual reinforcement received in a 3-person team. Person 2 and Person 3 are making heroes of each other. In contrast, Person 1 appears to be an outcast. Remember, this is not about whether or not people like one another. It's about how much they value each other's contributions, performance, and ideas. In our research, we have identified 3 different scenarios that increase the likelihood of creating an outcast. Scenario 1 is based on the history of the relationship and is where 2 individuals have failed to build value and respect for each other over time. Our brains predict everything we see and hear based on our previous experience. So if we haven't built value and respect for someone else, it does not matter how good an idea they put forward. Our brain will already have decided that it is no good and we will not really listen to it, only picking up on what we don't like or disagree with. We could call this a form of confirmation bias. And if the person with the negative opinion has influence over others, then this negativity towards the outcast will permeate. Scenario 2 is where there is competition between 2 people, especially when fragile egos are involved. Negativity then arises from the ego's drive to protect itself and see off potential threats to its status within the team. Scenario 3 is when there is passionate attachment to ideas. Passionate people see their ideas as extensions of themselves. In attachment theory, it becomes what is called a secure base, something that we rely on heavily to maintain our sense of self and security. So when our idea gets challenged or questioned, we react emotionally, as if we feel the challenge personally, as if it were a defend attack, rather than just a disagreement or even a question or alternative proposal. It's like calling our baby ugly. It is all too easy in these situations for the emotional response to produce defensive behaviours in the original challenger, so a spiral of negative reinforcement is set up. And when people are passionate about something, they tend not to listen to others, preferring to talk about their passion rather than taking the time to find out what really interests the other person. To summarise, in any meeting, people need to feel a good level of positive reinforcement in order to feel psychologically safe and part of the group. Finding the common ground on which people can all agree provides the sense of shared purpose that is essential to team success. Using questions and listening behaviours to explore and challenge ideas is more effective than straight rejection, and asking people to reflect on their performance is more effective than giving them negative feedback. This is the end of video 2. Here are some questions for you to think about for your meetings. In video 3, we will look at questioning and listening. And if you want to take part in this research, then please get in touch with one of us.